Africa Enlightenment Center, Religious, Political and Social Enlightenment.
Most people today assume Islam came to Kashmir peacefully through Sufi saints, through poetry and tolerance. But history tells us a very different story. After capturing Turkey and Kabul, the Arabs turned their eyes to Kashmir in the 8th century. What followed was a century of military frustration. In 713, the Emperor of Kashmir, Chandraped, defeated none other than Muhammad bin Qasim. In 1724, Lalitaditya Muktapida crushed Arab commander Hisham, and again in 754, Caliph Mansur's forces were pushed back. Even Mahmud of Ghazni, the infamous temple raider, suffered 2 defeats in Kashmir and never returned again. Historian Khalana actually had summed up many centuries earlier that Kashmir cannot be won by military power. But if swords could not conquer Kashmir, something else did. Sufi missionaries, Sayyids, exiled mystics. By the late 14th century, after centuries of invasions, Islam did not enter through armies. It entered through the robes and sermons. Many of these early Sufis like Sayyid Ali Hamadani were fleeing Timur's invasions of Persia, but did not come empty-handed. They brought with them a militant ideology masked in spirituality. Sayyid Ali's son Muhammad Hamadani arrived around 1393 CE during the reign of Sikandar Shah and took on the title Wujittan, the idol smasher. Together, he and Sikandar launched a campaign to completely Islamize Kashmir. These weren't saints, they were social enforcers. They banned music, wine, festivals, shops were shut down, temples were razed, and an Islamic dress code was enforced on Hindus for the first time in Kashmir's history. What could not be achieved by foreign invaders was now being done by insiders with royal backing. Entire Hindu villages were burned. Their lands were handed over to Persian and Afghan exiles. The glorious Martanda temple built by Lalitaditya and once among the grandest temples in India was demolished brick by brick. By 1410, centuries of Hindu and Buddhist heritage had been erased. Kashmir, once known for its syncretic traditions and independent spirit, was now governed by a state-backed theocratic order. And just when Kashmir's unique brand of Rishi Sufism had begun to take root, even that faced a new threat. In the 18th century, a new ideology arrived, Wahhabism, born in Arabia, harsh, literalist, anti-mystic. Where Kashmiri Sufism had once embraced local culture and philosophy, Wahhabism rejected everything except its own rigid version of Islam. Imported through Gulf-funded networks, this ideology undermined Kashmiriyat itself. The songs completely stopped, shrines went silent, and the interfaith fabric that had held the valley together began to tear apart. Islam did not arrive in Kashmir with armies, it came with missionaries and monarchs. The first Muslim ruler of Kashmir was not even a Muslim when he seized power. In 1320, a Buddhist prince from Ladakh named Rinchana took control of the throne. With few Muslims in the valley at that time, his conversion to Islam under the influence of a Sufi named Bulbul Shah marked a turning point in Kashmir's history. Rinchana adopted the name Sultan Sadaruddin and gave his symbolic conversion a political legitimacy to Islam in the region. And his reign was very short. But after his death, the throne was passed briefly to Kota Rani, a fierce and independent queen who resisted Islamic dominance. That resistance also ended in 1339 when a migrant from Swat named Shamir overthrew her and founded the first lasting Muslim dynasty in Kashmir. From this point onwards, Islam was no longer a personal faith, it became a state policy. The real transformation, however, did not come from kings but from Sufi saints, especially those fleeing Mongol destruction and Timur's persecution in Central Asia and Iran. Among them, Sayyid Ali Hamadani stands out. He arrived in Kashmir in the late 14th century with around 700 disciples, carrying not just religious texts but a political vision. Hamadani wasn't just impressed by Kashmir syncretism, he was disgusted. When he saw Muslim rulers still visiting Hindu temples and practicing local customs, He was outraged. He forced Sultan Qutbuddin to divorce one of his wives because she was the sister of the others and banned Muslims from participating in Hindu rituals. This wasn't just peaceful persuasion, this was religious engineering. Ali Hamadani's son, Muhammad Hamadani, went even further. Backed by Sultan Sikandar, he led what can only be described as a religious purge, targeting temples, enforcing Sharia, and eliminating what he considered as un-Islamic practices. By the end of Zainul Abidin's rule in the late 15th century, the majority of Kashmir's population had converted to Islam. This was not just because of any single war or decree, it was the result of generations of social pressure, political manipulation, missionary strategy carried out in the name of Sufism. This is a part of the story that rarely gets told. The Sufi saints who did not merely preach but ruled, who did not just convert but cleansed. What really happened was this: after centuries of flourishing under Hindu and Buddhist rule, Kashmir fell into chaos by the late 11th century. The Lohara dynasty, the last line of Hindu kings, struggled with civil wars, invasions, and a weakening administration. Temples began to lose royal patronage. Shaivism and Buddhism still thrived, but their golden age was coming to an end. And then came the storm. In 1339, a Turkic adventurer named Shamir seized power and established the first Islamic dynasty in Kashmir. This wasn't just some spiritual transition, it was a violent political takeover. And what was followed was one of the most brutal cultural and religious purges in history. What began as a dynastic decline quickly became a civilizational collapse. Kashmir, which was once the heart of Indian learning, where Buddhists and Shaivites debated under temple roofs, was turning into a theocratic state. We often hear that Kashmir's Islam is different, that it's spiritual, peaceful, that it came through Sufi saints, not swords. There is some truth there, but like all history, it is very layered. But Kashmir Sufism wasn't just like the rest of India, it was imported. It merged with something already ancient, Kashmiri Shaivism. The valley had already produced saints like Acharya Abhinavagupta, the towering 10th century philosopher sage, and mystics like Lalleshwari, a woman who walked away from society at the age of 24 and became the voice of a spiritual awakening in Kashmir. Her verses, like Akkamahadevi's in Karnataka, are sung even today. Out of this fusion of Sufi Islam and Hindu mysticism was born a unique path, the Rishi order. Its most beloved figure, Nand Rishi or Sheikh Nuruddin Wali. He learned from Lalleshwari and in return passed on the teachings of tolerance, simplicity and devotion that transcended religion. This wasn't just a religious movement, it was cultural. It gave birth to something deeper, Kashmiriyat, a shared identity. Hindus and Muslims visiting each other's shrines, Pandits tying threads at Hazrat Bal, Muslims coming to Pandit homes during Navre. During Eid, the first visitors and Muslim homes were Kashmiri Pandits, bringing mishri and blessings. This was not the Sufism of conquests and kings. This was Rishi Sufism, deeply local, almost Shaivite in its form. It even had a Guru Shishya Parampara. Saints like Swami Lakhmanju, the last great master of Kashmiri Shaivism, were read and respected by Sufis too. But here's the hard truth. The original Sufism of Kashmir, rooted in love, equality and shared tradition, was just a facade that existed for a while and became a blip on the radar of Kashmir's long history. When Wahhabism and foreign extremism entered the valley, they did not just attack Hindus, they wiped out centuries of Kashmir's own spiritual legacy. Rishi Sufi culture was replaced with Puritanism, temples were burned, Pandits were exiled, and even the old dargahs grew silent. Today, people speak of Kashmiriyat like it is still alive, but ask anyone who grew up in the valley before 1990 and they'll tell you all about it. Kashmiriyat died when the swords first came in, and it died once again when the guns arrived. From Rinchana's symbolic shift to Shamir's dynasty, and from the missionary zeal of Hamadani to the enforcement by his son, Islam in Kashmir was not an organic adoption, but a strategic transformation. And with it, Kashmir's ancient cultural identity, its temples and its traditions, its festivals, it all began to vanish. And this matters because today, when Hindus try to return to the land that their ancestors built, they're called settlers. When a fashion show happens in Gulmarg, it's called occupation. When temples are rebuilt, it's called cultural aggression. And that is the tragedy of Kashmir today.